My name is Owen, and if someone had told me a month ago that I'd be stuffing a bag at 3 in the morning, walking away from the home I built with my wife of 25 years, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, 49 years old, leaving the only woman I've ever loved, Honora. We met back in college. She was the kind of person who could light up any room, full of energy and just the right amount of chaos to keep life interesting. We dated for a few years before tying the knot. For the longest time, I believed we had it all, a solid partnership, 2 incredible kids, and the kind of life that others might envy. But I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. It all started with our college alumni reunion. Every year, the school hosts a grand event for different graduating classes, marking 25, 30, or 35 years since they walked across that stage. This year, it was our turn to celebrate. Honora had been looking forward to it for weeks, picking out the perfect outfit and scrolling through Facebook to see which familiar faces might show up. When we arrived, hand in hand, it felt like stepping back in time. Our old crew was there, and for a while it was just laughter and nostalgia, like we were 20 again. And then he showed up. Rick. I should have known the night was about to take a turn the moment I spotted him. Back in college, Rick had been relentless in his pursuit of Honora, the kind of guy who couldn't take a hint, no matter how many times she brushed him off. As far as I knew, she had never entertained his advances. But Rick? He never stopped trying. Even after we got married, the guy had the nerve to send an email claiming she'd made a huge mistake choosing me over him. Now, here he was, 25 years later, strutting into the reunion like he owned the place. With a wide grin, he approached us, arms outstretched as if we were old pals. Owen, Honora, wow, look at you two, still going strong after all these years. His voice dripped with insincerity. Then he turned to Honora, flashing a smirk. You haven't aged a day. Honora smiled politely. Rick, it's been ages. How are you? And just like that, the night began to unravel. Rick slid seamlessly into our group, like he belonged there, cracking jokes and charming his way into every conversation. At first, I played along, even tossing in a few jokes of my own. But then I started noticing things. His eyes kept darting toward Honora, not just in passing, but in a way that wasn't subtle. At one point, while I was mid-conversation with an old friend, I caught Rick leaning in a little too close to her. She laughed at something he said, and my stomach twisted. Not quite jealousy, but an instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. After dinner, the music kicked in, and everyone flocked to the dance floor. The band played throwback hits, and Honora pulled me in for a slow dance. For a moment, it felt like old times. Her head resting on my shoulder, my arms wrapped around her, the rest of the world fading away. Then, of course, Rick had to show up again. Mind if I cut in? He grinned like a kid who had just gotten away with something. I was ready to shut him down, but before I could speak, Honora smiled. Of course, Owen won't mind. And just like that, she was in his arms. I stood there, frozen, watching as she laughed at something he whispered in her ear. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. That smile of hers, it wasn't the polite, dismissive one she used for casual acquaintances. It was warmer, softer. When the song ended, I pulled her aside. What the hell was that? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She tilted her head. What do you mean? You let Rick just waltz in like he's your prom date, I said, frustration bubbling up. You know how he felt about you back then. Hell, he didn't exactly hide it. And now he's doing it again. She rolled her eyes. Owen, you're overreacting. He's just being friendly. It's been decades. Can we all just move on? I wanted to argue, but something about her tone made me hesitate. Sure, she sounded defensive, but there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Fine, I muttered. Let's just get through the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. And as the evening wore on, I kept catching glimpses of them together. Standing close, talking, sharing quiet laughs like the rest of the party didn't even exist. I tried to distract myself, making conversation with old friends, but my eyes kept drifting back to them. Every time, it was the same. Honora leaning in, Rick saying something that made her smile in that way that used to be just for me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, hoping the night air would clear my head. The cool breeze hit my face, grounding me a little. I leaned against the railing, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just old friends catching up, nothing more. But then I saw them. Through the banquet hall's large windows, I caught a glimpse of Honora and Rick slipping out a side door. My heart dropped. I didn't want to believe it. But before I even had time to think, my feet were already moving. Keeping my distance, I followed. They walked across the college lawn, the same place where we had created so many memories during our years there. I stayed back, watching as Rick leaned in, his hand brushing against hers. And she didn't pull away. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath. My chest tightened as I turned away, heading back toward the building, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to confront them, demand answers, but deep down, I wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse Honora would come up with. Back inside, I decided to keep my head down for the rest of the night. I avoided both Honora and Rick, sticking with friends who were too drunk or too caught up in their own nostalgia to notice that something was wrong. Eventually, Honora returned, looking flustered. Her hair was slightly messy, and there was a distant, almost guilty look in her eyes. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Sure," I replied, keeping my tone flat. This wasn't a conversation I wanted to have in front of everyone. The car ride home was silent. Honora stared out the window, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The moment we walked through the front door, she went straight upstairs without a word. Meanwhile, I sank onto the couch, staring at the clock, my mind racing with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. At around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps on the stairs. When I looked up, she was standing there, her face pale, eyes swollen and red from crying. She hesitated before sitting beside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in barely a whisper, she said, "I have to tell you something." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my heart hammering in my chest. She shifted uncomfortably, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "Owen," she began, her voice unsteady, "I don't even know where to start. How about with the truth?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "That seems like a good place." She winced, as if my words physically hurt her. For a second, I thought she might back out, but then she took a deep breath and met my eyes. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Tonight, I let things go too far with Rick." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Too far," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "What does that mean, Honora?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "We kissed," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It didn't mean anything, Owen. I was just caught up in the moment, in the nostalgia." I shot up from the couch, unable to stay still. "It didn't mean anything?" I echoed, pacing the room. "You disappeared with Rick, the guy who has been obsessed with you for decades, and now you're telling me it didn't mean anything? Are you kidding me?" She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm so sorry, Owen," she choked out. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I love you. Please, you have to believe me." I stopped pacing and just stared at her. This woman, the one I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, had betrayed me. And now she was crying, begging for forgiveness, as if that could somehow undo what she had done. I couldn't do this. Not now. "I need some air," I muttered, grabbing my coat. "Owen, please." "Don't wait up," I said, cutting her off as I walked out the door. I drove for hours, aimlessly circling the city as my mind replayed every moment of the night. Over and over, I asked myself how we had ended up here. How had the woman I loved for 25 years wound up in another man's arms? By the time I finally made it home, the sun was starting to rise. Honora was asleep on the couch, clutching a blanket like it was the only thing keeping her together. I stood there, watching her, trying to remember the last time I had truly felt like I knew her. But all I could see was Rick's smug grin and the way she had looked at him on the dance floor. And in that moment, I knew things would never be the same again. The next morning, I dragged myself into the kitchen, running on nothing but caffeine and anger. Honora was already there, sitting at the table, staring into her coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. "We need to talk," I said, dropping into the chair across from her. She looked up, her face pale, eyes swollen from crying. "I know," she whispered. "Why, Honora?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why Rick? Of all people, why him?" She exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she toyed with her wedding ring. "It wasn't about him, Owen," she said softly. "It's just, I don't know. I feel like I've been stuck." "Stuck?" I repeated, my jaw tightening. "We've built a life together, Honora. A family. A home. How is that stuck?" Her head snapped up, and for the first time since last night, there was fire in her eyes. "That's just it, Owen," she snapped. "We're stuck. You're so comfortable in your little routine. Work, dinner, TV, bed, and I'm just supposed to go along with it?" Meanwhile, Rick's out there living his life. He's traveled the world, started businesses, done something exciting. And me? I feel like I've just been watching life pass me by. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're comparing me to Rick?" I said slowly. "The guy who spent decades obsessing over a woman who didn't want him? That's your measure of success?" Her face twisted in frustration. "At least he's not a loser, Owen," she shot back. "At least he has ambition. What have you done with your life?" "Huh, what have we done? You're just coasting, and I'm supposed to be okay with that?" Her words cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. I clenched my fists under the table but forced myself to stay calm. "A loser," I repeated, my voice eerily quiet. "That's what you think of me?" She opened her mouth, then shut it, realizing too late that she had gone too far. "Owen, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted, my voice cold. "You meant every word." Pushing back my chair, I stood up, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "I hope Rick's ambition keeps you warm at night," I said bitterly, "because I'm done being your punching bag." "Owen, wait," she pleaded, tears streaking down her face. "I didn't mean it. I was angry, Honora, you've made it clear how you feel." The next morning, as I was still trying to make sense of everything, the phone rang. I saw Honora flinch at the sound, her body tensing as she grabbed it quickly. Her face, usually calm and composed, tightened when she glanced at the screen. Without a word, she rushed to the bedroom, pressing the phone to her ear, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but there was something different in the way she spoke, something off. A feeling stirred inside me, a gut instinct I couldn't ignore. She paced the room for a moment before abruptly heading toward the bathroom. As soon as the door clicked shut, I moved. My heart pounded as I reached for her phone on the side table, unlocking it with shaky fingers. And there it was, a call from Rick. Again. I stared at the screen, anger and disbelief washing over me. The same man who had spent years chipping away at my marriage, who had wormed his way into every crack of doubt and insecurity Honora had. I should have known it wasn't over. Rick wasn't just an old flame from college. He was a manipulator, someone who had spent decades perfecting his tactics, always lurking, waiting for the right moment. When I saw him at that reunion, I recognized it immediately. The calculated charm, the effortless way he inserted himself into our conversations, pretending it was all innocent fun. But it was never just fun. It was a game to him. And now, looking at that call log, I realized just how deep his game ran. 4 years, he had poisoned my marriage, bit by bit. The late-night emails he sent to Honora after we got married, disguised as harmless nostalgia, were only the beginning. The subtle ways he made her question her happiness, always comparing our life to his so-called adventure-filled existence. He didn't just want Honora. He wanted to erase me, to prove that he had one. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to confront her, demand she end it once and for all. But I didn't. Because why should I fight for someone who was already running toward another man? She had made her choice. She was the one still answering his calls, still meeting him in secret. And now, she was about to walk straight into a trap, one I knew Rick had carefully laid out for her. But that was no longer my problem. She thought she could go to him and walk away unscathed. But I knew better. Rick didn't care about her. He never had. To him, she was nothing more than a trophy, a long-lost prize he could finally claim. And once he had her, he'd toss her aside, just like he had done before. I wasn't going to wait around to watch it happen. While she was still in the bathroom, I grabbed my essentials, only what I needed, and left. I didn't look back. I refused to spend another second in that house, in that life. I didn't go far at first, just checked into a quiet motel a couple of towns over. I needed space to think, to process everything without her presence looming over me. I turned off my phone, blocked Honora on every platform, and swore not to check my emails. For once in my life, I needed to disappear. But the silence didn't last long. 3 days in, my phone started buzzing nonstop with calls and messages. I ignored most of them, but when I saw my son Stanley's name pop up, I couldn't bring myself to let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice cautious. "Are you okay? Mom's freaking out. She said you just vanished. She's talking about calling the cops to report you missing." I let out a bitter laugh. "She's playing the victim now, huh? Dad, what's going on?" Stanley pressed. "She won't tell us anything except that you left without a word. She's crying all the time. Emma's worried sick." Emma, my daughter. She was 20, in her junior year of college. Stanley, 22, was in grad school. They were good kids. Smart, kind. Everything I could have hoped for. And now, thanks to Honora, they were caught in this mess. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "You don't need to worry about me." "Dad," Stanley said again, his tone firmer this time. "We deserve to know what's going on. Did something happen between you and Mom?" I hesitated. They were adults, sure, but how much did they really need to know? Then I remembered Honora's words, the disdain in her voice, the way she had tried to make this my fault. My anger flared again. "Fine," I said sharply. "You want to know? Your mother decided she needed something new in her life. And guess who it is? Rick. The same guy who's been circling around her since college. I guess she just couldn't resist his charm anymore." There was silence on the other end. Then Stanley spoke, his voice tight. "What are you saying, Dad?" "I'm saying," I said, my voice bitter, "that your mother decided I wasn't enough for her anymore. That's why I left." Emma's voice broke in, shaky and uncertain. She must have been listening on speaker. "Dad, are you sure? Maybe it's not what it seems." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "She told me herself, Emma," I said, my tone softer now. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I just need you both to understand why I had to go." There was another long pause. I could feel their confusion, their pain, through the phone. "Look," I continued, my voice heavy, "I know this isn't easy, but I need you both to do me a favor. Tell your mother not to look for me. She'll hear from my lawyer soon enough." "Lawyer?" Stanley asked, his voice rising. "Dad, are you talking about divorce?" "Yeah," I said simply. "It's over, Stanley." In the background, I heard Emma start to cry. My chest tightened. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice thick with regret. "I never wanted this for you two. But this is how it has to be." After hanging up, I sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something heavier, a deep, aching sadness. I hated that my kids were caught in the middle of this, but there was no way around it. They deserved to know the truth. The next morning, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. I spent hours going over everything, our assets, our shared history, what needed to be done to divide it all. Signing those first few documents felt like crossing a line I could never come back from. I sent one final message to Honora through the lawyer. "From now on, all communication goes through my attorney. Don't contact me directly." It was cold, but necessary. I wasn't ready to face her again. Maybe I never would be. A month later, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was small, sterile. One of those places where even the simplest legal proceedings felt monumental. Honora sat at the opposite end of the table, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She didn't look at me. Not once. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Tears? An apology? One last desperate attempt to make things right? But no. If she felt anything, she hid it well. Her silence spoke louder than words ever could. The proceedings were straightforward. I had made it clear from the beginning. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted a fair split. Half the money in our accounts and my portion of the house's value. Honora could keep the house. The furniture. The memories. I didn't want them anymore. The judge signed off on the agreement without much fuss. Within an hour, it was done. 25 years of marriage reduced to a few sheets of paper. As we left the courtroom, I paused, waiting to see if she would say anything. She glanced at me briefly, just long enough for our eyes to meet. Her gaze was cold, distant. Then she turned and walked away without a word. No goodbye. No closure. Just nothing. The first thing I did after the divorce was finalized was book a flight. I needed to get away. From her. From him. From the life I had thought was mine. With the settlement money, I had enough to travel comfortably for a while. For the next 2 months, I drifted between countries, Italy, Japan, New Zealand. I hiked through breathtaking landscapes, wandered through ancient ruins, and ate meals that made me forget, even for a moment, the bitterness I had left behind. But no matter how far I went, her words followed me. Loser. That single word echoed in my head every time I looked in the mirror. I tried to shake it off, to remind myself of everything I had accomplished. My career, my kids, the life I had built. But the anger wouldn't let go. Then, one rainy afternoon in Paris, my phone rang. Emma. Dad? She said, her voice warm but uncertain. When are you coming back? Soon, I promised. Why? What's up? She hesitated. I want to see you. Can we meet when you're back? Something in my chest softened. Of course, I said. I'll let you know when I land. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from Emma in a cozy little cafe downtown. Dad, she said, beaming as she wrapped me in a hug. You look good. Thanks, kiddo, I said, pulling out a chair for her. You're not looking too bad yourself. She laughed as she set down her things and ordered a latte. Once the server walked away, she leaned in. So, she said, smiling, how's life? Traveling the world? Eating great food? Must be rough. I chuckled. It's been good for me. I needed the time away, to clear my head. She nodded, stirring her drink. And did it help? I exhaled slowly, considering her question. Did it help? Maybe. But some wounds didn't heal just because you changed your surroundings. I've hiked mountains, wandered through ancient cities, and eaten things I can't even pronounce. It's been freeing. Emma smiled, but there was something behind her eyes, a hesitation, like she was working up to something. I'm glad you're doing okay, she said softly. You deserve it. And you? I asked, tilting my head. How's school, work, life? She shrugged. Busy, but good. School's intense, and I'm interning at a non-profit now, so that keeps me on my toes. She hesitated, then added, Mom's, well, she's not doing great. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. Emma glanced down at her cup, stirring the foam with her spoon. She's kind of a mess, Dad. I don't think she's really bounced back from the divorce. Her voice dropped slightly as she added, and I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I think you might want to hear it. I leaned forward, curiosity tightening in my chest. What is it? Emma sighed, clearly weighing her words. A while back, I overheard Mom talking to one of her friends. They didn't know I was home. I wasn't trying to listen, but they were loud. And I prompted, my stomach twisting. She hesitated for a second before saying she started dating Rick after the divorce. I froze, my coffee cup hovering midair. You're kidding. Emma shook her head. Nope, but it didn't last. She hesitated again before continuing. Apparently, Rick used her, Dad. He just wanted to be with her for a while, and once he got what he wanted, he dumped her. I set my cup down, my hand trembling slightly. He what? Emma nodded, her face a mix of pity and frustration. She told her friend that he basically admitted he was only with her to prove a point, that he could have her after all these years. Like it was some kind of twisted revenge for her rejecting him back in college. She shook her head in disgust. He played along just long enough to win his little game, and then he ghosted her. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Rick had one. He had destroyed my marriage, humiliated Honora, and walked away without a scratch. A bitter chuckle escaped me. "That's something," I muttered, shaking my head. Emma reached across the table and rested her hand on mine. "I know it's a lot to process. I just thought you should know." I nodded, my mind spinning. "Thanks for telling me, Em." That night, lying in my motel bed, I replayed Emma's words over and over. Rick had orchestrated the perfect betrayal. He had torn apart my family, shattered my marriage, and reduced Honora to a shadow of the woman I had once loved. And for what? To settle an old grudge? It wasn't just the cruelty of his actions that got to me. It was the irony. Honora, a grown woman, a supposedly intelligent and capable partner, had allowed herself to be swept up by a man who was practically the walking definition of a red flag. She had fallen for his flattery, his empty promises, his smug charm. And now, here we were. A broken family, a fractured home. And Honora? She was left with nothing, except regret and the bitter realization that she had been played. As much as I wanted to stay angry, to keep blaming Rick for everything, I couldn't ignore the truth. Honora made her choices. She wasn't some naive girl who didn't know better. She was a 48-year-old woman who let herself be taken in by a fantasy. Rick may have struck the match, but Honora was the one who handed him the lighter. It was Emily's birthday. I had promised I'd be there. When I arrived, I did my best to push down the heavy weight sitting in my chest. The party was in full swing, laughter, clinking glasses, the sound of celebration. And then I saw her. Honora. She was standing by the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. The moment our eyes met, something passed between us. Unspoken, but undeniable. Like we were both standing at the edge of something we weren't sure we wanted to step into. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the tight knot forming in my stomach. "Hi," she replied, her tone soft, distant. She wasn't quite meeting my eyes. We spent the next few hours pretending, smiling for the guests, laughing at Emma's jokes, playing our roles. But underneath it all, the tension between us remained. Thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. I reminded myself that today was about Emma. This wasn't the time to drag our mess back into the light. As the night wound down and the last guests left, Emma excused herself to her room, leaving us alone in the quiet. "Owen," Honora said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. "The night you left, when you walked out, nothing happened with Rick," she said quickly, the words spilling out. "He tried to convince me, but I didn't go through with it. I swear." Something flickered inside me. Relief? Anger? A mix of both. I wasn't sure. "But you were still talking to him," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You were still meeting him." She nodded, her eyes pleading. "Yes, but it wasn't what you think. After you left, he started calling me, constantly. At first, I ignored it, but eventually, I agreed to see him." I let out a slow breath, my chest tightening. The fact that she had chosen to meet him after everything? That was betrayal enough. She swallowed hard, continuing. "After the divorce, I thought maybe there was something real there. At first, it was nice. He was charming, like he used to be, and for a moment, I felt like I had control again, like I was alive." Her lips trembled. "But then, he raised a glass to my divorce, Owen, like it was something he'd won." A cold chill ran down my spine. Exactly what I had feared. "So what did you do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "I stayed the night," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But once it was over, he told me to leave." She looked down, ashamed. "He said it was done." Just like that. I felt something inside me go numb. "I convinced him to let me stay until morning," she continued, her voice cracking. "I couldn't just leave like that. I thought maybe there was something more, that I meant something to him." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "But I didn't. I was just a game to him. And once he got what he wanted, I didn't matter anymore." I stared at her, trying to process it all. "And after that?" I asked. "No more calls? No more texts?" She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. Nothing. He disappeared. Like I never even existed. I exhaled slowly, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I feel ashamed, she whispered. I didn't think it would end like this. I thought maybe he cared, but it was all just a game. I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. I guess you learned the hard way, Honora. She let out a shaky breath, her face crumpling. I never wanted to hurt you, Owen. I don't even know who I am anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had once built a life with, the woman I had trusted, was standing in front of me, broken and lost. But it wasn't my job to fix her. Not anymore. I think it's time for me to go, I said, my voice steady. This isn't something I can fix. And I don't know if I even want to try anymore. Honora nodded, her face pale. I understand. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment before stepping outside. Everything had changed, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to let it. In the end, he won, and I didn't care. Let Rick have his twisted victory. Let Honora live with the weight of her own decisions. I was done carrying it for her. For the first time in months, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This wasn't my battle anymore.